Well, Sam, you know, you've been reporting on this trade here that has Chris Paul going to Houston. You know, first things first, why didn't Paul, do you believe, want to stay in L.A. and make things work with the Clippers?
So, Jared, my understanding is, you know, last couple of days, Chris was obviously thinking long and hard about this. He met with family, met with his agent, Leon Rose, met with the Clippers yesterday with Lawrence Frank and the rest of that group, Steve Ballmer, Doc Rivers. But the bottom line to your question, and something that he expressed to those guys close around him, is that when he woke up in the morning, he wanted to believe that he could win a title. And he had gotten to a place with the Clippers where, for whatever reason, he wasn't feeling it. He wasn't believing it. And that age certainly played a part, where he's been in this league for a long time. And, you know, he's a guy that we all know the backstory. Never been to the conference finals. He's taken a ton of criticism and scrutiny for that. And he was ready to make a move. So he opts in and puts himself in a position, I believe, potentially to sign the Supermax next summer and make up some of the money that he loses by doing this. But the championship and the desire to win it all was the driving force. This is
a very complicated trade that we're going to have to get all the details on. But as you saw, reportedly going back as part of a package would be Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, Sam Dekker, and a protected first-round pick in 2018. Okay, with all that said, let's look at Houston now and think about what Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni, the coach of the year, has been trying to put together. James Harden just had his best year of his career, without question, Sam, and he did it as the undisputed point guard of this team. You bring in a Chris Paul, sure, he works with the D'Antoni style, but does he work with Harden?
I think, you know, listen, here's the reality in today's NBA. X's and O's wise, maybe not. We're going to have to wait and see. But I think the new philosophy with the 6 degrees of Golden State mentality that has been forced upon, you know, the other 29 teams is that you stock up on talent. And Daryl Morey, in particular, the Rockets GM, has always had the philosophy and the idea that, you know, you get the talent first, you get it under the same roof, and then you figure out how to make it work. But I think we've got to talk a little bit about the subplot here that you kind of alluded to, the idea that is, you know, despite the fact that James had his best year as a pro, as the point guard, partnering with Mike D'Antoni, unleashing his, you know, playmaking abilities like never before, let's go back to late regular season where James wore down a little bit, had some injuries. I think you make a strong argument that at that point he lost the MVP award because the fatigue hit him. Then in the playoffs against San Antonio, last 2 games, with him having to have, you know, that kind of a load on his back, he didn't finish well. It's pretty obvious to me that when James looked at Chris Paul, he saw a guy who could get him back in a spot where he was more comfortable, where the load was different. As great as they were last year, you know, it seems pretty obvious that James didn't want to do that for the long term.
Sam Amick from USA Today joining us here with the breaking news, a reported deal of Chris Paul going to the Rockets. Now, this has to make you believe, as you're talking about, this Golden State mentality of stocking up in talent. And you, as you know, Daryl Morey has never been shy when it comes to pulling off deals and creative deals at that as well. They can't be done here, right? Chris Paul and James Harden, that's not enough to beat the Warriors in the West.
I mean, it helps you, you know, but let's not forget you lose Pat Beverley, who was just a major part of what they did last year. And certainly Chris Paul's on a different level as a point guard, but I was a big believer in Pat, not only what he brought defensively to a group that had gotten better on that end, but personality-wise, you know, he fit into their culture so well. Mike D'Antoni was in love with Pat Beverley. I mean, that's a big loss. And so, you know, they got to maintain their depth. You know, the Lou Williams thing, to me, is, you know, and Sam Dekker, they're going to be fine without those 2 guys. But you do have to keep loading up. And Daryl Morey is, I mean, for crying out loud, Jared, it's June 28th. Free agency hadn't even started. You know Daryl's going to keep going. They're going to try to create room. You know, is Ryan Anderson going to be back, or do they find a new home for him and try to mix it up? Although he was a great fit last year as well. You know, I think the roster is still going to take shape, but this is a hell of a move for them.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, too, about how much he loved Beverley. And yes, Chris Paul's coming off another season, Sam, where he makes first-team all-defense. In fact, it's the 7th time in his career. And that is not to take anything away from Chris Paul, but Doc Rivers went out of his way this past season to give, at times, Chris Paul a break defensively. They had Raymond Felton, they had Austin Rivers, they had J.J. Redick. They had a lot of times when they were healthy, now few and far between, but when they were, a 3-guard lineup to keep Chris Paul off the opponent's point guard. Not all the time, but now without Beverley, without Lou Williams, without, all of these pieces, can Houston continue to give Chris Paul the best possible scenario?
That part, we got to wait and see. I mean, I think your point's spot on about the defensive side of the ball. I remember when Chris got hurt last year with the thumb, I went to a convention in L.A. that he was at, and he was in the room. We were kind of chopping it up about his injury. And I remember him joking that this is what I get for caring about defense, because he got hurt closing out on a shooter in the corner, if you remember it, and trying to close space and be an aggressive defender. But it was a little bit of a tone of an older guy who's kind of like, man, I'm too old for this. Like, this stuff is hard. And so with Houston, it's a different context. And anybody who plays with James Harden in the backcourt, listen, as great a player as he is, let's not pretend that he's turned into a top-tier defender. He is not. So you're going to have to cover up his stuff on a consistent basis. Now that falls on Chris, and that's a tough challenge.
All right, let's finish this up here, Sam, talking about this reported trade that has Chris Paul go to Houston, by what you think this does to Blake Griffin, who now is a free agent starting midnight Eastern on Friday.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a game changer for the league. I mean, like you said earlier, I don't know how much it bridges the gap between the Rockets and the Warriors, but, it's another super team. You know what I mean? It's another squad that is going to have a crack at them. It's another fantastic narrative for us to follow in the coming season, because, all this idea that there's no parity and the Warriors are making the whole game boring. You're seeing the ripple effect right now. You're seeing the fact that these are all competitive players, competitive executives. There is going to be a response to what the Warriors have created, and this is probably just the beginning.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where Blake Griffin lands himself. Let's get to the other story of the day here with Phil Jackson and the Knicks parting ways, mutually parting ways. I don't know if, Sam, if you could see over the phone, I did the air quotes there. We had wondered throughout the course of this past season, with the comments with LeBron James, the comments about Carmelo Anthony, if this would have a lasting effect beyond Phil's tenure in New York. Now that James Dolan has decided to part ways with Jackson, can whoever steps in start to build this thing in the right direction where people want to play in New York?
That part we don't know yet, Jared, because we got to see what James Dolan is up to. I mean, can they do it? Yes. Does the NBA badly want them to get their stuff together? For sure. That is, Madison Square Garden is already a cash cow, but the league wants nothing more than for them to remove the dysfunction and have things operate smoothly. I'm just dying to see what direction this goes. The interest in Masai Ujiri is very real. The Toronto president of basketball operations, who's, highly respected. The timing is terrible, though. If you want Masai, he just signed a 5-year, $32 million extension last September. So, consider this much, Jared. Jeff Weltman recently leaves Toronto to go to Orlando to be their GM, and the Raptors got a second-round pick in return for him. If that's the price tag for Jeff Weltman, then my goodness, what is the price tag for Masai Ujiri? So I don't know how that's going to look and how that might actually happen. That would be, like, in a vacuum for the Knicks, that would be the fantastic move, knock it out of the park, you're on your way. The potential opposite side of things is there are already rumblings, that colleague and friend Isaiah Thomas, could be in the mix as well. And, and that's always going to be low-hanging fruit, so to speak, when it comes to the Knicks. He's very close relationship with James Dolan. But, folks wondering if maybe he looks at the NBA, Dolan does, and says, I tried it your way. I gave Phil Jackson $60 million. This was the guy that supposedly was going to fix my franchise, and it was even worse than it was before. So we'll see what happens. I think the phones are definitely ringing off the hook for the Knicks and the consulting firm that is helping them figure out their next move, and it's obviously an important one.
Sam, fun day. Just the 28th of June. We've got a few more months to go here before we get the season going. And I anticipate this is probably not the last news of the day, don't you think?
Well, my friend, I'm on the West Coast. It's 9:40. I just tweeted about how, a Phil Jackson firing and a Chris Paul trade before my first cup of coffee is a little tough. So we got a long ways to go, and maybe I'll talk to you later in the day about some other move.